Hey everyone, it's Sam from Massive Supply Co, and today I'm going to be showing you how to use my new Photoshop plugin, Bleeder. Bleeder is a non-destructive ink bleed effect plugin for Photoshop. We're going to cover installation and the basics of how to use it. When you download Bleeder, you're going to see that you have three files: the manual, the patterns file, and the plugin file. Before we even install the plugin file, step one is going to be installing the Photoshop patterns file. What you can do is you can open up Photoshop, click on Window and Patterns, and once you have the patterns panel open, it might look something like this. You might have some different patterns installed than I do, but this is what it looks like for me on default. Go ahead and click on the hamburger menu in the top right, and then click on Import. This is going to bring up a window. From here you can go and find the Bleeder patterns file. Once you find it, select it and hit open. It's important that you do this as step one, because if you try to convert a layer to an editable Bleeder group with the plugin before doing this, you will get prompted to select a pattern. If you see this prompt come up the first time you use Bleeder, this should let you know that you might have missed a step. Make sure you go back and install the patterns first. Once you have the Bleeder patterns installed, you can go ahead and install the actual plugin file. Now the plugin file is going to be called Massive Ink Plugin. I found a really strange bug when I was creating this plugin where if the file name includes the letters BL in it, or the folder you're trying to install this file from contains those letters, your installation will fail. I can't quite figure out what the reason is for this, but that's the reason that the plugin file isn't named Bleeder. If you're getting an error when you try to install, make sure that you don't have your file in a folder named Bleeder, as that might be contributing to an installation error. I'd recommend moving it to your desktop and then running this CCX file. So just be aware of that. Right now I'm going to double click on the CCX file and my Adobe Creative Cloud is going to open, letting me know that the plugin is being installed. You're going to get prompted asking if you want to install a third-party non-marketplace plugin. You can go ahead and hit OK. I will clarify that Bleeder does not have access to any of these three things, if that makes you feel more comfortable using it. If you agree, go ahead and hit OK, and Bleeder will finish installing. After install, Bleeder is going to show up on your Photoshop. If you ever close Bleeder and need to reopen it, you can go ahead to the top and hit Plugins, and then click on Bleeder. The plugin panel will be restored. As you can see, when you first open Bleeder, everything is disabled. You can't really do anything with it yet. Step one of Bleeder is creating a layer and selecting it. This is going to give you the access to the Convert button. You can see I have a text layer that I made here. I'm going to go ahead and select it and then click on the Convert button. After Bleeder initializes and creates a new Bleeder group, you can see I now have access to a whole bunch of different stuff in the plugin panel. We have the Convert button, the Commit button, and the Cancel button. I'll cover those a little more in a second. We have also got the color, and then all of these sliders, these four sections below: the strength, the grain, the crush, and the smear sections. These are going to be the effects that we use to treat our layers. Once we've created an editable Bleeder group, we can now make changes. Let's start here in the strength section. We have two options: the bleed amount and the strength. The bleed amount is going to determine how much bleed is actually applied to our layer. The higher it is, the more bleed; the lower it is, the less bleed. You can see as we increase this value that our layer gets a little more distorted. As I decrease it, the fidelity returns. It looks a little bit more like the text layer that we started with. The strength is what's going to allow Bleeder effects through. The higher this is, the stronger the total effects applied to your Bleeder group are going to be, and lower it is, the less the effects are going to be applied. Consider this to be the threshold of not only the bleed amount, but also the grain, crush, and smear sections. You're also going to notice that each of these sliders has arrows next to them. Clicking the arrow on the left of a slider is going to decrease that value by 1, and clicking the arrow on the right is going to increase it by 1. It's not obvious at first, but if you hold Shift on your keyboard while clicking one of these arrows, it'll make the value increase or decrease by 10. So you'll see as I hold Shift here and click that my numbers increase or decrease by 10. Sometimes you want to be a little more precise with some of these effects, so I've included arrows. That way you can get your bleed effects pixel perfect. Jumping down to the grain section, you can see that everything is currently disabled. By default, the grain section is turned off. In order to enable it, we will just select one of our other 4 grain options. Now that I've selected a grain option, I can change the grain amount, the grain size, or I can switch between grain styles. The 4 grain options are grain, reticulation, halftone, and noise. Clicking on these is going to change the grain style. Once you've selected one, you can go ahead and change the grain amount or the grain size. These effects are pretty straightforward. Changing the grain amount is going to change the intensity of the grain on your layer. As you can see, this effect mostly applies to the edges of your layer. As you increase the amount more and more, it might be a little more visible towards the inside of your layer as well. Because bleeder is non-destructive, you can always switch between different grain styles. You can go back, you can increase or decrease the grain amount as you please. The grain size determines the width and height of the grain particle. You can see that as I increase the grain size, that the actual texture is getting larger, and as I decrease it, the texture gets smaller. The precision arrows might be a little more useful for something like the grain or the crush section. Jumping down to the crush section, you can see that it's disabled the same way that the grain section was. Same idea here. Once you select a crush option, then these sliders will become enabled. The same as the grain section, there are 4 different crush styles that you can select from. Selecting one enables the sliders. Because bleeder is non-destructive, as always, you can switch between different styles. By default, the crush amount is going to be set to 100. Decrease the crush amount until you get it to a point you like, and of course you can always increase it again. The crush section might be the easiest to be able to see the effect of the arrows. You can see as I use the arrows and I increase or decrease my value by 1, pay attention to these little sections that I'm highlighting. You can see how a little bit of ink bleed is being added little by little as I increase or decrease values here. Now the final section is the smear section. The smear section is pretty simple. This applies a final horizontal smear to your layer. Picture it as if the print head had been smeared across your paper or your paper had been moved as the printer was running. Adds just a final horizontal smear. This is the final effect applied, so keep that in mind if you want to add just a subtle extra little bit of blur at the end. Now, as I've mentioned, Bleeder is a completely non-destructive plugin, which means that you can always go back and change the values. Continue to edit your layer until you get an effect that you like. You can always go back and change the bleed amount, the threshold, the smear. Everything is completely editable. Now let's talk about color. The color selector is pretty simple. Click it and select the color you want your layer to be. Because Bleeder only produces a single color output, you can only select it to be one color. When you convert a layer for the first time using Bleeder, the color is always going to be white, unless you are working with a text layer. If you convert a text layer in Bleeder, the color will be set to the same color that your text layer is. I'm going to create a new text layer here, and I'm going to change the color to something other than white. Let's go with this purple color here. You can see that my text is set to purple, and when I hit convert, the new Bleeder color that's created is now purple. If you're converting any layer with Bleeder, it's always going to end up white unless you are selecting a text layer. The text layer being converted will always generate the same color that the text is. You can see that Bleeder functions the exact same way. I can still change the effects. I can still change all the bleed amounts and the bleed effects as normal. Bleeder is also non-destructive and will always remember the values that you've applied across multiple layers. When I switch between layers here, you can see that Bleeder is going to remember the values when I select my initial text layer or when I select the new one that I've just created. It's always going to remember the bleed values and the color. Now, in order for Bleeder to be able to remember these values and for these Bleeder groups to remain editable, the name always has to remain Bleeder. The plugin will only recognize an editable group or smart object if the name of it is Bleeder. So if I were to change the name of this group to something else, the plugin is no longer going to recognize it as an editable layer. You're free to change the names of these groups or these smart objects, but just know if you do, Bleeder will not be able to recognize them. Now that we've covered Bleeder groups, let me tell you about Bleeder smart objects. In order to create a Bleeder smart object, you simply select an editable group and hit the commit button. The commit button is going to turn an editable Bleeder group into a smart object with the name Bleeder. You can see now that I've converted it, that over in the layers panel, I have a smart object named Bleeder. This is going to make it easier to add further effects, move it around your canvas, etc. Rather than working with a big complex group, we now have it in one consolidated smart object. You can also see that where the convert button was, the button now reads edit. Because this group is named Bleeder, the plugin is going to recognize that this is an editable Bleeder smart object. If we go ahead and click the edit button, we are going to convert this layer back into an editable Bleeder group. You can see that once I hit edit, the group is restored and all of the values are remembered. I can go straight back to editing this as if I had never converted it to a smart object. You can repeat this process infinitely, switching between Bleeder groups and Bleeder smart objects as you see necessary. With that, I'm going to turn this smart object back into an editable Bleeder group in order to show you what the final button does, the cancel button. The cancel button is pretty simple. Clicking the cancel button will restore the initial layer that you converted to a Bleeder group. When you click it, you'll be prompted to make sure that you actually want to cancel the operation. That way you don't accidentally click this button and delete your entire Bleeder group. If you do want to cancel, you can go ahead and click OK. You'll see that the entire Bleeder group is gone and only the initial layer that I converted to a Bleeder group is restored. Now I can do anything with this layer that I would normally be able to do in Photoshop. I can edit the text, or I can convert it back to an editable Bleeder group. The cancel button should be useful if you're editing a layer with Bleeder that you've decided that you don't want to edit. It's a quick and easy way to get back the layers that you initially converted to a Bleeder group. I want to make note of one other important part of Bleeder's functionality. This is something that happens when you initially convert a layer using Bleeder. I've brought in a logo here that is a multicolored layer. I'm going to invert it so that you can see that this is a white logo on a black background. Watch what happens when I hit convert. You can see that the resulting image is a big white box. That's not the result we were expecting to get. So why did this happen? Well, when you hit convert, Bleeder is going to take the contents of your layer, it's going to convert everything to white. So if you're converting an image that has multiple colors, all of the colors in the image are going to be converted to white. So you can see why that might be an issue with something like this, a white image on a black background. Bleeder has no problem converting multicolor layers to an editable Bleeder group. You just need to make sure that you're not going to lose the actual image when all of the colors are converted to white. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to grab the white of my logo. I'm going to pull it onto a separate layer. Now that I know that I only have the logo on a single layer, I can go ahead and hit the convert button. My result is no longer a giant white box, because I'm not converting a giant black box with a logo in it, and instead I'm just converting the logo. Now with the resulting Bleeder group, I can go ahead and edit it just as I would normally. So that wraps up how to use Bleeder. If you're watching this video because you purchased Bleeder and are trying to understand better how to use it, I just want to say thank you for your purchase. I do really appreciate it. If you're here and you're thinking about downloading Bleeder, a link to purchase it is in the description of this video. And if you're here looking for technical support that I didn't cover in this video, send me an email or message me on Instagram. I'll be likely to message you back there. You can feel free to leave a comment on the video. I'm less likely to see it and keep up with it, but I will do my best to check and respond here. Otherwise, your best bet is email and Instagram. Hopefully this was helpful, and thank you for watching.